Welcome to our next ACCANect series, episode 2, with the Honourable Michelle Rowland, the member for Greenway, who is also the Shadow Minister for Communications. We're very pleased to have her here today, but before we start, let's acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're all today. I'm on the Bidjigal land of the Eora Nation, and I'll hand over to the Shadow Minister. Thank you.
Thank you very much to ACCAN for giving me the opportunity to provide a few perspectives. And I too acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. I'm coming to you from Blacktown, and I acknowledge the Darug people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. 2020 has been an unforgettable year in many respects, and both the bushfires and the COVID-19 pandemic have reminded us that communication services are more important than ever. The portfolio is an instrument to help create a smarter, more modern and more inclusive Australia. An Australia where connectivity and content enriches our quality of life, it educates us, it informs us, it keeps us safe and empowers us to fulfil our potential, whatever that may be and wherever we may live or work. Today, I want to touch on three things: consumer safeguards, digital inclusion, and communications as an essential service. So firstly, turning to consumer safeguards. Part C of the Consumer Safeguards Review has prompted questions about what regulatory approach is best suited in the post-NBN rollout world, including the role of industry co-regulation versus direct regulation. And the first observation I'd make is this: for households and businesses on the NBN, the next 5 years should, in theory, be less complex and less problematic than the previous 5 years. We don't expect to have a mass migration between networks, providers and technologies approaching the volumes that we have seen in the past. We also don't expect to have industry and NBN processes as undeveloped as they were in the early and middle stages of the rollout. What I do believe we will have, however, is higher expectations from consumers that broadband be truly treated as an essential service. Australian citizens want and they expect better service levels because they are more dependent on the internet than ever before, and therefore they will have less tolerance for excessive and unreasonable periods of downtime. So in terms of that overall landscape, we're likely to have a consumer environment where there are fewer touch points for failure because the volume migration is winding back, but higher expectations from consumers about their service quality and availability, giving that increasing reliance on broadband. And this is my frame of reference in thinking about how we get the most benefit about any changes to the Consumer Safeguards Network. It's been suggested that as we approach this juncture, we should undertake broad reform of consumer protections and adopt a new approach, perhaps, as to how we regulate. Now, I think there's merit in strengthening enforcement tools and being more deliberate in how we use direct regulation to address time-sensitive and serious harms where industry has been slow to act. But I've been somewhat cautious about the proposition that we somehow need another large reform process because the track record over the past 6 years simply does not fill me with confidence. We've had the Spectrum Review that took 6 years and fell well short of what was promised. The USO Review, which produced a new 3-letter acronym. The Content Review, which again took 3.5 years and still isn't settled. And the On and Then Off Again Consumer Safeguards Review, which began back in 2016. In many of these examples, we've ended up with a large make-work exercise that ultimately delivered very little of substance. And one of the primary reasons for this is I believe the communications agenda has not been guided by a clear set of principles or objectives. Now let's take wholesale service standards for broadband just as an example. When Labor examined the landscape in 2018, we determined that one of the vital elements of safeguarding consumers would be establishing strong service levels over the NBN. And that's why we announced the NBN Service Guarantee Policy. And I thank ACCAN for its contribution to that policy development. Our objective was clear: to offer better protections for fault rectification timeframes, new connection timeframes, and missed technician appointments. The mechanism beneath this was also unremarkable. NBN needs to be accountable to retail providers, so retail providers can in turn be accountable to their customers. And as far as I was concerned, this should have been a no-brainer. Yet between 2014 and 2016, the government preoccupied itself with plans to deregulate service standards. Then in 2018, it wrote to the ACCC, effectively opposing wholesale NBN service standards. And now that the volume rollout is complete and complaints are heading down, it's signalling it wants to adopt a stronger regulatory posture for consumer protections. So it's really been all over the shop. If you went and spoke to an ordinary consumer out in the suburbs, such as here in Blacktown, I can tell you what they'd say. They want a fast and reliable connection at a reasonable price, and that when something goes wrong, they want that problem resolved quickly, and they want to be assured that their provider is accountable when things don't go to plan. When we look at how consumer protections have performed over the past 5 years, several of the key issues have arguably been co-regulatory and regulatory interventions lagging behind the emergence of consumer harms, partly because of process and partly because industry has been slow off the mark, and partly because it was inconvenient for the government to admit there's a problem. Also, lines of accountability were not adequately defined, which was compounded by that lack of accountability by service providers and NBN Co that would too often leave consumers stuck in the middle. The accumulation of too much complexity and duplication from various rules and requirements that are now in place, and the inability of the ACMA to take faster and stronger enforcement action for non-compliance with industry codes. So looking forward, I believe there needs to be focus and clarity about what problems are most important to solve and how any changes will affect them. There should be caution, I believe, about rushing into wide-ranging changes for their own sake, especially if that risks distracting policymakers, regulators, and the sector from delivering more meaningful and practical improvements for consumers and small businesses in the near term. Labor will always look to support practical and evidence-based measures to improve consumer outcomes, and we look forward to seeing what comes out of Part C of the Safeguards Review. Now turning to digital inclusion. The original Labor vision for the National Broadband Network had a deep logic that joined up its policy architecture, political values, broadband pricing, and the economics of a fibre network to make it all work. It was a connected logic informed by engineering and economics, a plan that addressed the expectations of the Australian public on connectivity, fairness, and opportunity, alongside which ran Labor's National Digital Economy Strategy, which translated the implications of the physical network into tangible goals for people on digital literacy and skills, as well as teleworking, as it was known then, with a roadmap for implementation. The features all joined up to address two dominant ideals of modern Labor. Firstly, advancing access and equity to break down the barriers of disadvantage and improve the lives of working people. And secondly, to promote fairness and prosperity in the broadband-enabled world for everyone. Inequality is economically irresponsible, and in the 21st century, it has a digital dimension. To be digitally included means being able to access, afford, and actually have the ability to use online technologies to participate in society and the economy, and in turn, help realise the benefits of the digitally connected world across all spheres. To be digitally excluded, on the other hand, means not being able to participate owing to barriers and not contributing as a result, while being left further behind at an escalating pace with each new development in the rapidly evolving digital landscape. Too many Australians are being left behind in the offline world, and this carries over into the online environment, with each disadvantage compounding the other. In government, Labor delivered and then updated the National Digital Economy Strategy in 2011 and 2013, setting the goal of Australia becoming a leading digital economy and laying out the roadmap for delivering Labor's 2020 vision. The strategy had cross-portfolio buy-in and prioritised digital skills second only to physical infrastructure as one of the key enablers of a leading digital economy, and noted the need for a comprehensive approach to build digital literacy. Yet this government has failed to produce a digital economy strategy, a comprehensive 5G strategy, or digital inclusion strategy. We need to recognise that digital inclusion occurs along different dimensions, and various studies typically identify up to 5 important areas. Access, the ability to actually get connected to quality infrastructure. Affordability, the ability to get connected and afford services that meet your needs. Skills, to actually be able to use the internet. Motivation and value, knowing the reasons why the internet is a good thing and how it can improve your quality of life. And trust, including just not knowing where to start if you need to go online. As we confirmed recently during the pandemic, there still remain Australian households who have no connectivity at home, among which include families with young children, low-income households, and older Australians. Each cohort is likely to be impacted by a different combination of barriers, and therefore each requires a tailored strategy. For example, families with children under 15 give the clear feedback that the primary barrier relates to the affordability of services and devices. Now, COVID presented a unique opportunity to scope this problem and address it. For the first time, schools, and by extension, state education systems, were able to identify children who did not have the internet at home as classrooms shifted to online delivery. Based on the most recent ABS data before the pandemic, the final household internet survey indicated around 3% of Australian households with children under the age of 15 did not have the internet at home. At the time, this suggested children in up to around 55,600 family households with no internet at home. And that's why, along with my colleague Tanya Plibasek, who is our spokesperson for education, we called for an NBN wholesale rebate to provide free connectivity to families and children with no internet at home for a period of some 12 to 24 months. The fact that this unforeseen event had made it possible to identify these households means the opportunity should be taken with both hands to help as many children get connected initially, and then work out how to transition them onto a more sustainable arrangement later. One model we suggested was for the Commonwealth to partner with a single retail provider for the specific purpose of this initiative, with NBN Co providing a reverse wholesale rebate for around 12 to 24 months to support a $0 retail price. This model would help simplify delivery by providing eligible households with a single point of contact to get them connected more quickly. Now, for older Australians, there's a variety of factors, with skills, trust, and motivation playing a greater role. This requires investments, one-on-one engagement, persistence, and strong partnerships with local organisations. Now, I do feel that in order to obtain deep insight and properly scope the problems we want to address, we do need better data about what is happening across the key cohorts in terms of the proportion not taking up NBN services and of the proportion who are, what speed tiers they are in. And this is the best way to develop targeted, evidence-based policy to address the primary barriers affecting take-up. The recent announcement that the CSIRO and NBN Co will use data-derived insights to direct investments to support business and consumer use cases is welcome. And it remains to be seen whether it will make a meaningful contribution to a digital inclusion strategy and indeed the realisation of that strategy. So we do urge perseverance here, because even modest gains can deliver significant benefits. Finally, I want to touch on resilience and the role telecommunications services and the industry have played in times of crisis. Over the past few months, the nation's resolve has been tested by 2 very serious crises. We've seen bushfires spread across the continent with an intensity and impact not previously experienced. I want to acknowledge the efforts of the telecommunications industry over this period, and also government, to coordinate responses in dealing with these twin developments and their impacts on connectivity. Nearly 1,400 facilities were impacted by the fires, including 322 mobile towers, with the overwhelming majority of outages caused by power outages rather than fire damage. Fire damage accounted for 1% of outages incidents, which highlights how important the availability of mains power or robust backup arrangements are to the resilience of telco networks. Australia's carriers really stepped up during the fires to maintain power and restore services to impacted towers, as did NBN Co, and they deserve our acknowledgement. Following the peak of the bushfire season, Labor consulted broadly about the issues that arose and what this might mean going forward. These conversations did not reveal a systemic shortcoming in processes or coordination. If anything, what they did affirm is how seriously the sector takes its responsibility during times of such crisis and the professionalism in going about their jobs. There are areas for improvement, particularly in relation to information flow and coordinating capabilities for site access. But on the whole, the performance of the networks over that period, I think, was better than many people had expected. And of course, just as the bushfire season subsided, a new threat emerged in the form of a global health pandemic. This raised a series of operational and consumer issues, which included the flow of telco workers between states, the operation of facilities such as call centres and retail shop fronts, and the handling of service continuity and NBN installations for consumers, as well as addressing financial hardship that arose as businesses temporarily shut and jobs were lost. As Australians shifted to working and studying from home, this led to a sharp increase in data consumption that presented retail providers with the difficult choice of either absorbing higher wholesale costs from NBN Co or increasing retail prices to their customers. This dilemma highlighted some of the uncertainty that CVC pricing can create. And that's why Labor made a constructive call in mid-March for retailers to be provided with capacity relief. And we are pleased that NBN Co took the initiative to put these measures in place and has provided extensions since. This ensured that services continued to work smoothly, even as demand on the network increased, and that pressure was not placed on retail prices. Connectivity was already essential before the pandemic and has become even more so. The critical nature of ubiquitous broadband as the underpinning of a resilient modern economy perhaps had not been properly appreciated or understood until now, but of course that has well and truly changed. An important question looking forward is how governments give essential and critical services a more concrete and meaningful expression in the policy settings and disaster management frameworks that have been put in place. It's my view that there needs to be nationally consistent and formal recognition by federal and state governments that telecommunications is an essential service. A formal recognition would flow through all levels of government and remove ambiguity as to what the expectations are. It would also remove bureaucratic barriers and ensure, for example, carriers receive expedited exemptions that recognise the critical services they supply and the need to keep them readily available. The industry has played an important role in supporting the community, and if federal and state governments can make their lives easier in responding to disasters, then that's exactly what they should do. So thank you for the opportunity to share those few thoughts and look forward to some discussion.
Thanks very much for that presentation. Some really interesting points in there and some ones I wanted to drill down a little bit further on, and also a couple of other topics too. So the first one relates to the trial of audio description on ABC and the SBS, and also the success of ACCAN's accessible telecom service. We think that these services have shown that there is a strong demand for accessible communication services in Australia. So we're wondering, what are the key issues that Labor sees in supporting people with disabilities to access communications products and services?
Well, certainly it's pleasing that there has been some progress in providing audio description, for example, on free-to-air television. because it does mean that blind and low vision adults and children can enjoy some of their favourite programs, and that's up to 14 hours on the public broadcasters. I guess the key thing here, Teresa, is we're really keen to hear how it is going, and I'm sure ACCAN is doing consultations in that area. And look, I've been a long-standing supporter, as have many of my colleagues, of equality of access for television. And it is better late than never, but it has taken a very long time to get to this point where essentially this is a human rights issue that needs attention. And, you know, we took a policy to the last election to fund the public broadcasters with $2 million each to provide audio description by this year, and to work constructively with the wider broadcast industry to develop a framework and a timetable. I think that timetable is really important rather than setting it off in the never, never. And you know, we do need to have some sort of, I think, some goals and some certainty for people. So it is disappointing that we still have silence at this stage on a plan for the implementation of AD on other television services. And I would note, you know, the government's own report of the audio description working group noted that broadcast television is still the most popular medium for most Australians, particularly older Australians, who currently comprise the majority of people who are blind or vision impaired. So, look, it's a step in the right direction, but we really are still lagging behind. And it's really well and truly past time that this was fully implemented. And I know I'm talking particularly about broadcasting services, but of course, you know, in other telco services as well. I want to acknowledge, you know, ACCAN's role in continuing to consult and be aware and advocate to government and to the industry about what people need. So I guess my concluding comment there is we need to ensure that we're actually listening to how things are going. And listening also, it shouldn't be a proxy for delay. It should be a proxy for getting things right and for getting things done expeditiously.
Thanks for that. I also wanted to drill down a little bit further in relation to the ACCC's wholesale service inquiry, which is now complete, and the issue in the Consumer Safeguards Review, which is now wrapping up, that focuses on reliability of communications, and I really appreciate your comments in your presentation about that already. But now we're really moving on past the build phase of NBN, and as you rightly pointed out, people in Blacktown, people across Australia really wondering what the guarantees might actually be, especially now that NBN Co is the statutory infrastructure provider. Just wondering what you think the reliability guarantees should be that Labor would like to see for consumers.
Sure. And I think you're absolutely right. As we go from the build to essentially the operate phase, we are moving into this different frame. I think the key issue here is then when you're dealing with faults or connections, just by their very nature, monopoly operators don't have a strong incentive to provide a responsive service. That is a fact. And that's what creates that fertile ground, if you like, for blame shifting that leads to further downtime. So that's when you're dealing with faults or connections. But you've also got issues of mass outages as well. And in those ones, network providers probably do have strong incentives to get on top of them quickly and to find resolution. So I still think there is very strong merit in having some sort of financial rebate system when it comes to NBN Co for individual faults and connections, and to provide that incentive to live up to its commitments. And I think we also need to, being outcomes focused, the outcome isn't about punishment for NBN Co or to overcompensate consumers, but it's that really fine line of incentive regulation to support the policy objective that's being sought, and that is to reduce excessive downtime. So in terms of the long-term arrangements, my preference is that service standards be set in regulations rather than the WBA, which currently exists. And I think that makes sense for the service standards to apply to equivalent fixed line residential networks that have sufficient scale as well, because consumers should be treated equally irrespective of the network they're on. I also think another incentive that's worth considering is for retailers to be permitted to capture a greater share of the rebate if their NBN modem offers a fallback 4G or in future 5G connection capable of providing that service continuity and that equivalent data usage if the NBN connection drops out. I think providing those options, because again, it should be about service continuity. People don't care, I think, how it's being provided as long as they still have a service. And I think the beauty of that would be that it doesn't diminish the incentive for NBN Co to provide timely fault rectification, but it does, provide that that service continuity that people are looking for.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And I think you're right that in the end, unless you're a small business, most people don't want the compensation. They want the industry to be incentivized to resolve it quickly. And it's an interesting point you make about smart modems versus modems that don't have that SIM-enabled ability. So just finally, what are the three main priorities that you would focus on if you were to become Minister for Communications tomorrow?
Well, I think the top focus really does have to be jobs. And we're talking about jobs immediately, the economy, but also across the sector where, as I said in my remarks, it really is a joined up portfolio that is impacting on every other aspect of the economy. So I think we need to ensure that it's got really a frontline role in the Australia's economic recovery. And I'd want it to be stronger and more vibrant than it's been previously. And I've been very interested in Australia's creative economy. And when we're talking the creative economy, that should be not just a greater source of jobs, and it's not a futures proposition. I'm talking about jobs that we're talking about jobs in the here and now. And the second would be enhancing that national resilience and drawing on the really unique capabilities of assets in the comms portfolio to keep Australians safe. It is one of those portfolios, where often it's either home affairs or defence, that's seen as the prism of keeping Australia safe. But comms, again, being so cross-portfolio, has a critical role to play there. And it really is the most important task of a government when you think about it. And that includes, for example, keeping us informed through our public and our emergency broadcasters, the connectivity that I discussed through phone and broadband services. And in times of crisis, again, you can see its critical importance. And the third, again, that I've touched on, it really is about improving people's quality of life through the utilisation of ICT. And I just think digital skills and literacy, it makes things simpler and it improves accessibility. Everything from banking to online purchasing. I remember a time when e-commerce was still it was a buzzword that no one really understood, and now it's coming back into vogue again. It's like teleworking, like we used to talk about teleworking. Now we're talking about collaborative platforms. It's all the same thing. So it hasn't changed. I think just its prevalence has become broader with different meanings for different people. And apps can be used for everything from game playing, but also health rehabilitation. I'm getting physio at the moment, and I get it through an app to remind me that I need to do my exercises. My physician knows when I've done it in real time and what my pain level was during that period of time. And these are things that we've talked about in the abstract, but when you can actually see how it works in practice, you realise the benefits of it. So all these things are enhancing our quality of life. I do, think there does need to be greater practical support for parents and carers when it comes to keeping our kids safe online. You know, having an 8-year-old who is very interested in apps, you know, I know where to find information, but again, you know, finding the time to be able to do that or anticipating the need for that. And the number of times I've heard people say, oh, that should be a job for, you know, schools to do. Well, you know, the school curriculum, you know, is arguably one that's very full, and it needs to be, you know, these types of media literacy, I think, is becoming, you know, more and more, I think, expected of children, and expected of parents to be able to pass on. So having those sorts of skills for critical thinking, you know, understanding whether something's appropriate or not, you know, finding the time to be able to sit down and actually teach that to your kids. I will admit it is difficult. It is very difficult, and I'm sure, you know, as I, you know, move around the community and listen to parents, it's very similar. But, you know, I think, you know, again, the pandemic really has shown us how, you know, ICT can really enhance that elusive work-life balance as well. But I think in summary on that last point, I think we need to also appreciate, you know, there's no panacea when it comes to delivering these outcomes. It takes time, it takes persistence, and above all else, I think it takes the will of government to really want the comms portfolio to be a leader. So I guess that's probably the key themes that draws in my 3 elements there.
Thank you very much for that, Michelle, and thanks a lot for your time today. I'm sure that our members and those that watch this will appreciate getting some insight into your perspectives. So thanks very much.
Thank you, and stay safe.